Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this week's edition of Irish Farmers Journal Farm Tech Talks. The rain has arrived, the grass is growing, and later I'll be catching up with our dairy editor, Aidan Brennan, our beef and suckler editor, Adam Woods, and our sheep and schemes editor, Darren Carty. As ever, I'd like to thank our sponsors, FBD, MSD Animal Health, Bord Bia, and Ornua. Earlier this week, ladies and gentlemen, Embrace held a very poignant ceremony to remember all those that had lost their lives in farms. And we finished our Farm Tech Talk last week talking about the importance of farm safety. This week, we're going to start our Farm Tech Talk on talking farm safety. And earlier, Aidan Brennan caught up with Ciarán Roche from FBD.
What are the biggest challenges, I suppose, in terms of the safety side of it, Ciarán?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot going on here, Aidan. One of the biggest issues we have is the age profile of farmers. So 55% of farmers are over the age of 55, 30% are over the age of 65. And as we look at the fatalities, 43% of all fatalities in Irish farms involve farmers over the age of 65. So that's a big issue. And how to manage safety from their perspective. As you get older, you mightn't be as fit, as strong, your hearing's not as good, you're not as agile. If you have an accident, you don't recover as quickly. So it's important, to modify the work you do, or modify the expectations of an older person working on your farm, what they need to do to ensure that they're going to be safe on the farm. We also have an issue, I suppose, with financial pressure, and it can be across the board within agriculture. And at different times, it hits different areas harder. But if you physically don't have the money, to invest in your facilities, there is going to be an issue in relation to safety. We look at the greatest cause of accidents on Irish farms are livestock, of 42%, according to the National Farm Survey figures. So it's really important that there's good calving facilities. But simple things are important, like a calving gate, and they're not overly expensive. So it is important that we invest from that perspective. Expansion, dairy herds, we've had significant expansion, and with expansion, it puts pressure on a lot of issues. So you have a lot more construction going on the farm. Farmers are getting involved in this themselves, or they're subbing out the work. And there's legal obligations there that the farmers have in relation to that work. We see silage pits getting higher. You've seen pits there last year that were over 33, 34 foot in height. Extreme risk to an operator on that particular pit, just because of the volume of silage that happens to be in place. So as you expand, your facilities need to expand to cope with that as well. There's a big shortage of labour, and not just labour, but I'd say competent labour on farms. And often at this time of the year, even when we look at the silage contracting and that, we see a lot of younger drivers driving machines that maybe don't have the skills and competencies, and maybe the level head when they get into a panic scenario. So that's a huge issue, and how we I suppose manage that will take a lot of thought going forward, because without enough labour, some tasks aren't safe to do on your own. You need help on the farm. Another big issue we have is machinery are just getting larger, they're getting bigger. So there's pluses to that as well. We do have better engineering solutions that make some jobs safer, but vision gets very poor. And a lot of the fatalities we see on Irish farms are actually people getting knocked down by a tractor or a machine. So we need to consider that. If we moved into other industries such as quarries and construction, there's cameras at the backs of vehicles. So we need to consider other mechanisms to ensure the safety of people on site, whether it be children, ensure that they're in a safe play area. And the next thing, I suppose, is stress, fatigue, work pressure. Farmers are working long hours, they're tired, and especially at certain times of the year, whether it's the calving season, silage season. And when you're tired, you're more likely to make a mistake. And if you make a mistake, that could lead to an accident. So it's important, I suppose, that you plan your work properly and you take proper respite bites and you have food, etc. Because without the proper nourishment, I suppose, and good health and even physical exercise, even though we say farmers are very healthy, they're out in the open, if you're on a machine a lot, you might be getting the physical exercise you need. And the last thing, and possibly the biggest thing to me, is changing culture and behaviour. I think most farmers understand the risks on their farm. Every farmer knows that a PTO shaft is dangerous, that a tractor with brakes that aren't working are dangerous, that an uncovered slurry pit's dangerous. But still, when we look at the fatalities and the serious accidents, they're quite predictable in the general run. If someone got injured helping a cow with calving because they didn't have a calving gate or proper infrastructure in place. So we need to change our behaviour and the culture, so it becomes unacceptable. And what I mean by culture, Aidan, here is often you might see a young child maybe on a tractor, and if the neighbour farm does the same and everyone in the locality does the same, then it's a perceived norm and it's okay. But it should never be okay to have a young child sitting in a tractor. A child has to be at least 7 years of age with a safety belt in place before that's done. And there's other issues like that on farms as well. So culture and behaviour are the biggest pieces. They actually don't cost a lot of money, to change your behaviour. Changing behaviour is a challenge. I know, even when we look at, New Year's pledges, it's hard to keep them. We have to think about it continuously. And I think that's the biggest challenge for the farming industry ahead. And if we're going to make real change in relation to fatalities, we have to change the culture, that there's a good culture of safety on farms. And, when someone does something that's unsafe, it would be looked at and frowned upon, such as maybe when I was a young guy growing up, you went to get the bales with your father because of the square bales, you knew you got to lift home on that trailer. Nowadays, that just wouldn't happen. It would be frowned upon. So that's the biggest challenge, I think, to agriculture.
Okay, a lot of very strong messages and great advice there from Ciarán Roche from FBD, and thanks to FBD for that. The grass is growing, there's a bit of heat in the ground, and stock are thriving, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm delighted to be joined by our beef and suckler editor, Aidan Woods, our sheep and schemes editor, Darren Carty, and Aidan Brennan, our dairy editor. Aidan, I stay with you. Good grass growth over the last week. Is too strong a cover going to become a problem very soon?
Yeah, they're already a problem, Justin. Grass is really jumping out of the ground in the last few days, but the weekend, last weekend was actually variable enough. Monday was actually a very cold day down in Munster anyway. So growth rate was poor that day, but really good then the following days. So it's variable and it's catching farmers by surprise. Covers that are maybe, nice covers of 1,200 to 1,300, ideal for grazing, are within the space of 2 days are jumping up to 16, 1700s, because it's those covers just before they're due to be grazed that they're the ones that are growing the fastest. So average growth rates are up there. They're 80, 90, 100 kilos a day. So yeah, a big risk of covers getting too strong and causing problems. One of the main problems actually that the farmers are experiencing at the moment is they just haven't got the opportunity to cut these paddocks that are gone too strong for grazing for silage, because the weather has been wet and damp, and there's rain coming most days. So there are the challenges, but to be fair, there's different challenges in different parts of the country. Those in drier land, those that were suffering from drought, I suppose, back last month, they're happy to be in this position. Whereas if you're in the west or the northern parts of the country, it's really getting difficult now. There's too much rain in those places, and there's a risk of damage. So, not everyone is happy about it. You'd have to say, Justin.
Adam, is Cavan starting to get a bit mucky? Have you guys had enough rain up there?
Absolutely, Justin. We've had too much rain. We had 60 mil in Cavan over the weekend, and that brought with it issues because paddocks are actually starting to get mucky up here. And Sunday was a really bad day here, cold, wet, and I know a couple of guys with calves with pneumonia very, very quickly came in. So yeah, issues there, and issues around tetany as well. Actually, you'd never expect tetany to be an issue in the month of June or the month of July, but I guess with a really dry period followed by a really wet period, there's really strong growth. Cows are going into really lush pastures, and with a cold couple of days, as Aidan said there, temperatures dropped up here in Cavan to 9 degrees on Monday, and a couple of issues there with tetany, I heard of local farmers. So it brought with it lots of issues, and really we've had enough rain at this stage in Cavan.
And Adam, just on that tetany issue, what are you doing? What advice and maybe what are you doing in Tullamore in terms of to tackle tetany? Because as you say, it wouldn't be a problem at this time of year normally, but obviously with this burst of grass growth, it is starting to become a problem.
Yeah, there's a few options there, Justin. You can go in with, we'll say, a fibre source, hay or silage. Probably not maybe needed for that. In Tullamore, we went in with licks again. We've found good, we'll say, use of the licks in the springtime. We just went back in with some licks into paddocks. You can feed some concentrates along with some CalMag either, but it's probably licks is probably the best option at the moment, and just give it to them as they want it.
Darren, we talked last week a little bit about weaning and weaning management and keeping post-weaning performance on the lamb side going. Is this cold, wet weather affecting lamb performance, and what should farmers do to try and keep lambs moving ahead?
Yeah, I suppose Justin Aidan hit the nail on the head there where he said farmers in the east of the country that had gone tight on grass, they have covers coming nicely now, and lambs are thriving ahead and they're performing. In the west of the country, you're probably, as Adam said, we've got too much rain, the dry matter and grass has dropped, and it's just leading to a tricky period. I suppose for later lambing flocks, it's also presenting opportunity, say problems and opportunities in this. Some of them farmers, I suppose maybe they're caught at the moment and haven't got silage cut. Rain is just maybe preventing them from getting paddocks cleaned off, getting surpluses out. So they have a difficulty in getting nice quality aftergrass back into the system for days to 2 weeks time. But on the flip side, I've heard of a lot of farmers who would normally sell store lambs maybe going in weaning early, and there's lots of demand for that at the moment. The fact that farmers in the east, there's been a surge in grass growth. There's huge demand in March in farm sales. I was talking to a farmer the other night in Roscommon who generally sells off 250 store lambs, and he said that he normally would be weaning now and have them ready for 3 weeks time, and the farmers are already looking to see would he sell early just to try and manage grass. We're also seeing maybe some beef farmers that say tapped into the sheep's trade last year for store lambs. They did quite well, and they're back in the system now too. So it's, I suppose, maybe it is stepping up to be a fairly good opportunities for them.
Darren, I see from your sheep trends, it's actually not just in terms of the live trade for lambs, but uncharacteristically somewhat, we're seeing lamb prices rise at the start of July. That's not really a traditional time when you would expect the market to be strengthening. What's happening there?
Yeah, it's really uncharted territory, Justin. And look, it's very positive that we've seen 60 to 80 cents knocked off the value of lambs in the last 5 weeks. And for a lot of farmers, their fear would have been that for the first week of July, you often get 20 cent more knocked off. And really, I suppose it's the dynamics of supply and demand really coming into force. This time last year, they was pushing heavy numbers of lambs onto the market at very competitive rates, and it was undermining, say, Irish sheep meat exports. We've seen the UK price increase by about 20 pence per kilo in the last week. And that has really put, I suppose, maybe a bit of steadiness into the trade. Where they were maybe coming onto the market 30 to 40 cent lower than Irish lamb, they're now maybe 10 cent to 15 cent above, and it's given, I suppose, our processors a better opportunity to go out and trade. The other thing that is driving it is factories just can't keep layerages full. They were after maybe 7 or 8 weeks of very strong kills. The spring lamb kill is running close to 60,000 ahead of this time last year, and there had to be a point where you would have said that, look, it would have exhausted itself out and we would have had a lull period, and that has just come that farmers in the East Coast would have been pushing lambs out at lighter weights due to grass supply issues, and farmers in the West would have been maybe delayed in getting lambs going. And now you've seen a lot of weaning in flocks, and you've just seen that sort of lull period. And like factory quotes, I think for anyone selling, it's important to keep very much abreast of the sort of the trade over the next few days. We'll be keeping good updates online, so we will, of how it's moving, because like factories are quoting 520 to 530 this week, but there's upwards of 560 being paid today. So it's important just to, I suppose, maybe make sure you're getting the maximum value.
Adam, Darren talks about the lamb factories being very busy. I'm just reading your beef trends there as well. The meat factories, the beef factories are also very busy as well, with unseasonably high kills, 37 plus thousand cattle killed last week. What's happening there, and what's the trade like?
Yeah, it's a huge kill, Justin, for the last week in June. Maybe a little bit of overhang there from, I suppose, COVID-19 cattle that weren't killed, but it's really positive, I guess, to see prices, increasing or staying steady in a high kill, because if there was ever an excuse, I guess, to pull price, it was in a high kill week. So that shows that the demand is there, and that we'll say the trade is good. We've seen a little bit of move on heifers. You're talking 365 now for heifers, maybe a little bit more for those with numbers, or maybe some producer groups getting that bit more. A serious appetite there for Aberdeen Angus heifers. We've seen a new player on the market for a new deal for Angus beef, and that's putting some pressure on the traditional factories that were killing that Aberdeen Angus beef to get numbers. So definite bonuses there. Bonuses up to 20 cent at the moment, and we've seen that in the Mart trade as well for those Angus heifers. They're a very, very good trade. A couple of key men in the market around Mart rings for those cattle. Northern trade has continued very, very strong in the last week. Again, around March, you're seeing, we'll say, those factory buyers or those processor buyers for that food service trade. Again, very, very strong, probably paying prices in excess of what southern buyers can buy at. And that's putting pressure on southern agents then to get cattle. And I'm told that, we'll say, agents in yards this week have been told not to leave any cattle behind them. There's a reluctance there to lift the price, but definitely don't leave any cattle behind you. So that's all positive. How much more is left in it is hard to know. I guess if we look to our European market, we're probably not that far off it. We're still a long way off the UK market. The UK market has risen by about 44 cents a kilo since the 25th of April, whereas the Irish price has only went up by 22 cents. So we're still a long way off that. But there's probably other reasons at play there as to why that UK market has risen higher than the Irish one. So
I think the advice, Darren and Adam, from both of you is if you have lambs to sell or if you have cattle to sell hard, and there are premiums going. Aidan, it's quite similar actually, reading a piece from Lorcan Allen in this week's Farmers Journal. The dairy markets are also responding well, having obviously taken a bit of a wobble from COVID. They seem to be bouncing back, particularly butter.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it just signals the resurgence in restaurant trade and the service sector, like, so that, you know, they're all buying more product now, and that's helping prices. Like, so you've butter and cheese almost back to pre-COVID levels. Now skim milk powder is still back about €400 a ton of where it was prior to COVID, like, but yeah, look, it's good. It's all very positive, and I suppose the question is whether that's going to be reflected now in milk prices that'll be set over the next few weeks. So it's look, it's good, you'd have to say, yeah, definitely.
If Jack Kennedy's watching, guys, he'll be giving out to us for talking about markets and not technical farming. So we better get back inside the gate. Aidan, how's breeding going, or is it nearly coming to an end?
It's nearly coming to an end. There's a couple of weeks left in it. For the most part anyway. Most farmers will finish up breeding, you know, the last 2 weeks of July or so into early August, depending on where you are in the country and your calving spread. The big risk at the moment, Justin, now is bulls getting completely knackered. I've been on a few farms this week, and you're looking at bulls and they're hobbling around the place, like. And if you're asking those animals to get cows and calf, like, you're putting a lot of faith in an animal that's you know, lucky to be able to walk around, because they're out 3 or 4 weeks at this point. And you're forgetting, like, you know, herds are getting bigger. These bulls are doing more work. They're doing more walking, number one, and they also have more cows to cover. So you need a good team of bulls if you're relying fully on them. Look, it's okay if you're doing AI along with the bulls, which some people do. Even if they're not vasectomized bulls, they'll still do AI with the natural service bulls. But for me, that's the big risk. Look, it's mixed in terms of how breeding is going. Some farmers are reporting really good results. You know, very quiet now in terms of the breeding scene. Others then are seeing repeats coming back. You know, there's and particularly 6 or 8 week repeats, which, look, in some cases that's embryo mortality, which is common. Like, you know, you're talking about 5% or thereabouts of cows will conceive and then lose that pregnancy subsequently. In other cases, then they just weren't seen for various reasons. You know, at the 3 weeks after the first service, they weren't seen either. There was a silent heat or a missed heat, and then they might show a stronger heat then in the next time around, and that's what you're seeing at the moment. So there's a bit of that there. It's worrying. Farmers don't like to see that. Don't like to see the repeats, but you're looking at it, it's fact of life. But all you can do is do your best in terms of observation in order to pick them up or make sure that your bull team is working correctly.
Adam, Declan Marin has a piece in this week's paper in terms of his series on weaning management. This week he's talking about meal feeding cows. Just how important is that? And maybe just give the audience some indication as to the feeding levels needed and the type of ration that they should be feeding.
Yeah, Justin, Declan has outlined this week, I guess, the important point in meal feeding of weanlings. And there's 2 aspects to this. There's the beep scheme. There's €30 available for that option under the beep scheme to make sure you meal feed your weanlings 4 weeks pre-wean and 2 weeks after weaning. But there's also the added benefit of get some health and also live weight gain in those weanlings. So there's a really good return on feeding meal to weanlings, about 5 to 1 for a weanling compared to maybe 10 to 1 for a store bullock or a finishing bullock. So Declan has done the figures on it, and for an investment of about €25, there's probably a return over investment of about €40 in terms of increased live weight gain of that animal. There's also the added benefits of stress, I suppose, reduction, and that's, you know, reducing the bond between the cow and the calf, We've seen stress around weaning time can be, can bring on pneumonia and a lot of problems in weanlings. So there's those two added benefits, and Declan has comprehensively went through it this week in the paper as regards what the benefits of that are, and also feeding levels. You mentioned their feeding levels, and I guess continental, bull calves will probably take maybe 3 kilos, maybe a little bit more if you're maybe selling them towards the back end, whereas continental heifers maybe 2 kilos. Traditional bred heifers maybe down to 1.5. In terms of, you don't want them going fat either, but definitely in terms of helping them on for sale for September, October, going in there with those continental cows at 3 kilos would definitely be worth it.
Spoken like a typical Cavan man selling weanlings, Adam. 3 kilos. Obviously, you want to keep them fairly, push them on. We can come back to that another day. Darren, 1st of July now, into July, is it 70,000 hectares of hay meadows now are eligible for cutting, and typical, the weather has broken and farmers don't have the weather to actually get into the fields. What's the score there?
Yeah, I suppose it's a bit like when kids go back to school, Justin, the weather always picks up. When hay meadows can be cut, it always turns the other way. So I suppose the department have said in other years, look, at the target under the glass measure is to try and get hay, but if weather continues to be bad and farmers can't get it, that you can cut it for silage as long as it's cut, say, and turned twice, and that's to try and get seed dispersal. I suppose, look, from a farmer's point of view and trying to get the best quality silage is that, or the best quality feed, that farmers will be making a move on them sort of meadows in the next week to 10 days. The other, I suppose, maybe allowance is that there's 280,000 hectares classified as low input permanent pasture, and farmers can also come in now and top them paddocks. And I think, look, that will be a welcome for farmers, given that some of them are maybe on lowly stock farms. Quality is maybe poor and gone out of control. So it's important that they can get them back in again and for the rest of the year.
Adam, just darting back to you, you have a big week coming up now with working with Teagasc now, I know, closely over the last couple of weeks in terms of their virtual beef week. Talk us through that. What's happening?
Yeah, we have a massive week next week, Justin, on farmersjournal.ie, where we're rolling out, I guess, the Teagasc beef virtual week every day at 12 o'clock. And I will say, spoke to Teagasc researchers and specialists last week. We've got a lot of footage, a lot of discussions on the, I suppose, challenges and opportunities for the industry going forward as well. But it kicks off on Monday at 12 o'clock, as I said, on farmersjournal.ie. We'll cover suckler beef production on day one. We'll move on to dairy beef production. We'll cover grassland. We'll say nutrition on the Wednesday. Sustainability issues, greenhouse gases, climate change on Thursday, and we'll wrap it up on Friday at 12 o'clock with a discussion with Paul Crossan, Pierce Kelly and Kevin Hanrahan on, I suppose, economics of systems, where we're going, future policy, cap reform, I suppose opportunities and challenges, as I said, for the sector going forward.
I suppose that leads us in nicely. Earlier, ladies and gentlemen, my colleague Lorcan Allen, our agribusiness editor, caught up with Padraig Brennan from Bord Bia to get an insight into what's happening out there in the markets post-COVID-19.
And Padraig, what was coming out in the survey results in terms of risks? I suppose obviously that was peak COVID time, but
it was. Yeah. Well, I think if you look at it, not surprisingly, COVID was the highest risk. 9 out of 10 companies placed that as either a high or very high risk facing their business. Second then coming out was the whole challenge of diversifying into new markets. And third was Brexit. So I suppose if you look at the COVID side of it, first of all, there's a couple of key things coming out there. Number one, came across loud and clear, and I think we've seen it ourselves, obviously, from farm right the way through the supply chain, is about the resilience that the supply chain has been able to show. To keep product on shelf and to keep product flowing, if you like, over that period of time. But very much, I suppose, coming out in terms of the risks was a recognition that COVID is meaning that things are going to be different and going to stay different for quite a long time to come. Whether that's in terms of the change that we've seen, obviously, most particularly from a food service demand point of view, the stronger emergence of online, and other channels like that, they're all meaning that companies are having to look at, I suppose, their product range, their product format, logistics, all of that as well. And I suppose the other big worry among companies then when it came to COVID was the whole fear of recession. And I think 7 out of 10 would have highlighted that fear of recession being a major risk to their business throughout the rest of 2020 and into 2021. And I suppose fears around unemployment, slower food service demand, and a slower demand generally for products and food and drink being no different to that. And I suppose what that would mean then in terms of pricing and demand for their products, that's a major concern for them. I suppose the other thing that came out then from a company point of view was I suppose some caution, given the wave nature, if you like, of the pandemic so far, was there was a little bit of caution about companies making definitive decisions. There was still very much, let's wait and see how this issue evolves over the coming months before we make any longer term decisions in terms of where we're trying to take the business. But generally, I suppose a sense of let's be prepared, let's have our business continuity plans in place, let's try and assess the risks on an ongoing basis and make a judgment as the situation evolves. But certainly a lot of nervousness around that piece, if you like.
Okay, Lorcan, Padraig, thank you for that. Lots of interesting market analysis and research going on in Bord Bia. Before we conclude this episode of Tech Talks, ladies and gentlemen, I just would highlight a new initiative the team in the Irish Farmers Journal have brought to market this week. It's called the Farmers Journal Daily. It is a mechanism that will allow us to text you a bulletin every night at 7:30, Monday to Friday, to your phone. All you do to access that bulletin will be text the code in your paper this week to the Farmers Journal, and that will trigger the bulletin for the rest of the week to go to your phone. The bulletin will contain news, it will contain market analysis, and it will contain key technical advice for your farm. We won't keep you. Our focus is to have it as a 10-minute read to keep you up to speed every evening. So if you're interested in that service, simply text the code in the paper to the number that's detailed in this week's Farmers Journal. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen, for this week. I would like to thank our sponsors, MSD Animal Health, FBD, Ornua, and Bord Bia, for their continued support, our specialists for their input again today, to Padraig Brennan from Bord Bia, and indeed to Ciarán Roche from FBD for all their advice and information. Delighted to say Jack Kennedy will be back in the hot seat from next week on. But in the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, stay safe, safe farming.